Welcome to Vlog 1, Skills versus Capacities in the Weight Room. To start, we should first understand what is a skill and capacity issue in the weight room. So a skill issue is a limitation resulting from poor motor control. The athlete does not use the optimum motor strategies for the movement, and this is a result of either a lack of familiarity with the movement or they've adopted a suboptimum technique. To improve a skill issue, improvements should focus on regressions of the movement, reinforcing optimum movement through cues, and time practicing the movement. The capacity issue, on the other hand, is a limitation which is related to structural issues and physical qualities, resulting from a lack of mobility, force production capacity, stability, and so on. Improvements for these issues are in the shape of drills to improve on the lack of mobility, for example, banded dorsiflexion drills to improve ankle mobility. It is important to note, however, that these issues are not mutually exclusive and they can overlap. However, one is always more predominant than the other. Athlete A will demonstrate a capacity issue on the back squat. Watching Athlete A squat, what sticks out for me straight away is the lack of depth. The athlete fails to reach parallel, as being seen by the lines on the screen. In addition to this, shows very little ankle dorsiflexion. In addition, when we view the athlete from behind and we have a look at what's happening at the feet, we see the athlete's heels come up at the back. As such, as the athlete descends in an attempt to reach parallel, we see a compensatory movement with the heels coming up at the back. This movement is an attempt to try and get his knees over his toes and reach a positive tibial angle. Thus, this compensatory movement is a result of lack of ankle mobility and stiffness in dorsiflexion, and is hence why the athlete fails to reach parallel. Meyer 2014 suggests that this compensatory movement results in reduced stability of the squat, and it is also suggested by Meyer that the lack of dorsiflexion mobility may result from restricted Achilles tendon or a tight soleus or gastrocnemius. A knee-to-wall test was conducted to observe the lack of ankle mobility. As you can see, the athlete's left ankle displays a range of 88.5 degrees compared to the right ankle, which is 74.7. Thus, it is clear here that an ankle mobility issue is present, even more highlighted by the fact athlete A's left ankle fails to even come away from the wall to reach his knee on the wall without his heels coming up. In addition, when we use aids to help the athlete's lack of mobility, we can see an increased depth in the squat. The athlete reaches around parallel with his knees over his toes and a positive shin angle, with no compensatory movements. As such, from this it is clear the athlete suffers from a lack of ankle mobility and therefore demonstrating a capacity issue in the squat. Furthermore, this issue can be improved using dorsiflexion exercises as seen, progressively adding weight. In addition to this, Howell 2020 and Gion 2015 suggest ankle mobility exercises such as the self-stretch strap, heel drop and banded ankle dorsiflexion should be used, as the latter research suggests all three exercises significantly improve ankle mobility and dorsiflexion. Watching Athlete B squat, a skill issue is present. From the side view, as Athlete B squats, it is apparent to see he hinges forward in an attempt to gain a full range of motion in his squat. Furthermore, when we slow the movement down and view the athlete from behind, we can see the athlete compromises at the knee, seen by the slight knee valgus present. The first thing we look to address is the knee valgus, by adding a resistant band between the knees. This was performed with cues to push the knees out. The athlete was also cued to show his badges in order to promote a proud torso and prevent the athlete from hinging forward. As we can see, this has some success. Furthermore, the squat was then regressed to patterning exercises. The athlete was cued to show his badges to focus on keeping that torso proud and prevent the hinge motion observed earlier. This was then progressed using a Swiss ball and a wall in an attempt to help push the athlete's torso out and remove that hinge motion we saw earlier and get familiarised with squatting with a proud torso. This movement also progressed on the patterning exercise before, as the athlete has to reach sufficient depth just past parallel with no hand support as seen before. This work also helped the athlete to achieve a quiet and controlled pelvis. Exercises can then be progressed to include a barbell and a bench to provide an aid for the athlete to try and reach parallel. Furthermore, we can start to add load in the form of a goblet squat. As you can see, from these exercises, when the athlete now squats, changes have occurred, with no or limited knee valgus due to no compromises at the knee, and as observed, no hinge motion is present, with a much prouder torso and much smoother pelvic motion as the athlete descends. So the second movement will be a Romanian deadlift, and athlete A will again demonstrate a capacity issue. Watching athlete A perform an RDL, we see a nice arched spine, shoulders pinned back to help lock the back into a lifting position, pelvis nice and neutral, and when he descends it's clear he pushes his bum to the back of the room. However, watching the clip, it is evident the athlete lacks the range of motion required to achieve sufficient depth, and complete a full rep. Thus, the athlete offloads tensions off the hamstrings and negates all positive outcomes of the RDL. I think this is a result of lack of flexibility within the hamstrings and poor hip flexion mobility. To demonstrate the lack of mobility/flexibility, a sit and reach test was used. As you can see, the athlete struggled to get his fingers anywhere near to his toes, with athlete A reaching an angle of 77.1 degrees, with most of his movement done without a neutral spine. As such, most of the movement came from his thoracic. To improve this capacity issue, the athlete should focus on stretching exercises for his hamstrings. This is because Davis in 2005 demonstrated static hamstring stretching to be the most effective at improving hamstring length. Research has suggested that this may be the result of the facilitation of the Golgi tendon organ. It is believed that the static tension placed on the muscle tendon unit activates the Golgi tendon organ, which produces autogenic inhibition of the muscle that is being stretched. These stretches should be coupled with hinge movements and unilateral RDLs, both of which will ensure we maintain the motor control aspect of the RDL. Athlete B will demonstrate a skill issue in the RDL. Watching athlete B perform a Romanian deadlift, what sticks out for me straight away is the athlete uses his thoracic and lower back to move, rather than utilising the hinge movement. The athlete fails to pin and throw his shoulders back, meaning he does not lock his back into an ideal lifting position, and is hence why we observe the compensatory movement of excessive kyphosis of the thoracic and a lower back dominant movement strategy. The athlete fails to initiate movement with help from the hip, glutes and hamstrings, and hence why we observe a curved spine and thus negating all positive impacts of the RDL. It is also apparent to see that the bar is too far away from the athlete, and as Bird in 2010 suggested, that the further away the bar, the greater torque placed on the lumbar spine, as the load is further away from the axis of rotation, therefore placing the athlete at a greater injury risk. Furthermore, when we watch the athlete from behind, we start to see some knee valgus during the descent phase, whilst also further demonstrating the curved spine and the compensatory thoracic movement rather than that hip hinge movement to initiate the RDL. To demonstrate this as a skill issue, we regress the RDL to work on the hip hinge motion. We regress the exercise to work on that hip hinge movement to allow the athlete to start to initiate the movement from the hips, and therefore allowing him to get an increased range of motion at the hamstrings. The athlete performs some good mornings, with cues on sending his hips to the back of the room to try and get the athlete to initiate the movement from his hips, whilst also cueing the athlete to show his badges, in an attempt to keep his torso nice and proud and pin and throw his shoulders back in order to lock his back into the ideal lifting position. This was then progressed, ensuring the hands shadowed the barbell path. Mini bands were used here in order to overcome the knee valgus. The athlete was cued to push his knees out and not let his knees cave in. This was then progressed using an aid in the form of a foam roller placed in between his knees to prevent the valgus, whilst maintaining technique. The athlete shadowed an RDL to increase the range of motion at the hamstrings. This was chosen in the hope the athlete starts to form and gain familiarity with the movement patterns and start to develop motor skills and patterns needed for this more optimum technique. When we move the athlete back to the barbell, with and without the aid, it is now clear to see the athlete no longer has that thoracic dominant movement, with him initiating the movement from the hips and utilising the hinge movement. Furthermore, if we look at the barbell, it is now much closer to the body. In addition, if we look at his knees, no valgus is present. To summarise, non-optimum movements in the weight room are either a result of a skill or capacity issue. A skill issue, as identified with athlete B's squat and RDL, are the use of a sub-optimum movement pattern as a result of lack of familiarity with the movement, or they've adopted a sub-optimum technique, as seen with athlete B, where he had excessive thoracic flexion at the RDL and demonstrated knee valgus. To improve on a skill issue, we typically focus on regressing a movement pattern and reinforcing optimum movement patterns through cueing and aids. A capacity issue, as identified with athlete A's squat and RDL, are limitations resulting from structural and physical qualities, as demonstrated by athlete A's lack of ankle mobility in the squat. The capacity issue is rectified by identifying the issue and addressing it through the use of mobility drills and movement exercises. All the references mentioned throughout the vlog can now be seen.